Check, check, check. 1 2 1 2.
Hey, Derek, how you doing? Pretty good, man. It's going good. All right. Oh, yeah.
Check 1 2 1 2. Check 1 2 1 2 1 2. Check 1 2. Check 1 2 1 2. That sound coming through to you? Check 1 2 1 2. Test 1 2 1 2. Check 1 2. Check 1 2 1 2.
Charles, you can hear every time something drives over the line. Really?
They didn't put down yellow jacket?
Huh?
They didn't put down yellow jacket?
I don't care, man.
Jimmy
Okay, as long as they're not out here.
will. Cable. Oh, that's a full cable.
What?
It's a full cable. Real.
Real.
Full reel.
What?
A full. Yeah, the full. Full reel.
I don't know which one it is.
If it was Kenny.
Oh yeah, Kenny wouldn't have done it.
Check, 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 check. Check, 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 check. Check 1 2. Check.
On the steps. Please just test her. You have the other one. Okay, look, just use the VO. Just use hatfill-steven, that's fine.
You hearing okay?
Okay, go ahead. Please test her. Oh, can you back that off at all? That's killing my eyes. Yeah, I can hear you. More or less, yeah.
You got 30 seconds.
I can hear you, Liz, yes. Yep. Yep. Kev, what do I call this? The filing?
Filing, yeah.
Okay.
Lawsuit, yeah. A civil lawsuit.
Do we know who's doing the presser? Is Hatfill going to be here?
What?
Is
Hatfill
Hatfill?
is not going to be here. Just
Okay.
Lord. Stand by, Jane.
Kira, Dr. Hatfill is bringing suit today. He is filing charges against the Attorney General of the United States, John Ashcroft, the Department of Justice, also the FBI, and some lower-level officials. He is alleging that some of his constitutional rights have been violated. As you said, he has been named as a person of interest in the anthrax investigation, but he has never been charged. In the filing, which we are just now taking a look at, he says that these individuals and organizations have ruined Dr. Hatfill's current and future employment prospects by repeatedly leaking anonymous, defamatory, and erroneous information about his character and criminal culpability to the news media, expecting that it would be widely disseminated. It goes on, when Dr. Hatfill did no more than proclaim his innocence publicly and lodge official protests, the defendants responded with further intimidation and harassment in retaliation for the exercise of his First Amendment rights. What they're alleging here is that his Fifth Amendment rights have been violated, his First Amendment rights have been violated, also certain privacy laws. They are seeking from the U.S. government a declaration that his rights were violated, an injunction against any further violation of his rights, and also unspecified monetary damages. There has been at this point no official reaction from the United States Department of Justice. However, officials did speak to one of our producers and say they rejected these charges, and they noted that there had been an internal Justice Department report filed in January by the Office of Professional Responsibility, and it cleared Attorney General John Ashcroft, saying he had not violated any law or regulation or Justice Department policy while naming Hatfill a person of interest in this case. We're expecting a press conference from Hatfill's attorneys very shortly. Kira, back to you.
dignified fashion. You would have a podium here?
You okay, Bo?
I'll give you some sound checks, fellas. Tell me if this works for you. Okay. Want to keep talking? Sound all right to you all? Okay. Okay. Let me back up just one second.
Yeah, hang on just a sec.
All right. Hey, Joe, come over here. Behind these guys.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Tom Connolly, and with me is Nick Braven. We represent Dr. Stephen J. Hatfill, who many of you already know as the man Attorney General John Ashcroft identified as a, quote, person of interest, unquote, in the government's investigation of the anthrax mailings of 2001. For more than a year now, Dr. Hatfill has been questioned, searched, tailed, bugged by the FBI. Dr. Hatfill had nothing to do with the anthrax attacks. No evidence links him to the crime, yet the Attorney General and a number of his subordinates have sought to make him a scapegoat. In the process, they have trampled Dr. Hatfill's constitutional rights, and they have destroyed his life. As a consequence, today, Dr. Hatfill filed a civil complaint in the United States District Court for the District of Columbia against the Attorney General of the United States and a number of other government officials for their blatant violations of his constitutional rights. The complaint details what Dr. Hatfill has endured. He has had his home searched on national television, not once, but twice. He has been followed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for months on end, all at the direction of the Department of Justice. And at the direction of the Department of Justice, he was terminated from his employment at Louisiana State University. He has been a target of a coordinated campaign to publicly implicate him in a crime that he did not commit. The Attorney General and his subordinates have taken Dr. Hatfill's life as he knows it. They have made him a prisoner in his own home. All this without any evidence linking Dr. Hatfill to the attacks and without bringing any formal charges against him. This is not the way our justice system is supposed to work. With no signs, the government plans to temper its Kafkaesque punishment. Dr. Hatfill has brought this lawsuit in an effort to vindicate his rights. The complaint we filed today details not just what happened to Dr. Hatfill, but how it happened. A year after the anthrax attacks, the government's investigation had unfortunately stalled. Around that time, the Attorney General and his subordinates decided for their own personal and political purposes that it was essential to appear to know who committed these offenses. So in violation of the very laws they are sworn to uphold, they embarked on a highly public campaign to accuse Dr. Hatfill without formally naming him a suspect or charging him with any wrongdoing. This public campaign against Dr. Hatfill began last summer when the FBI purposefully leaked that they were going to conduct a search of Dr. Hatfill's apartment. Never mind that Dr. Hatfill had consented to the search, like many other scientists had, in an effort to aid the investigation. The FBI was orchestrating a media event that they wanted broadcast live to a national audience. The government wanted to show, through the use of this leak, they wanted to show an anxious nation that they were making progress in the anthrax investigation. Once the FBI thrust Dr. Hatfill into the spotlight, the Attorney General himself joined in. Last summer, Mr. Ashcroft publicly and repeatedly identified Dr. Hatfill as a, quote, person of interest, unquote, in the government's anthrax investigation. He used this phrase, which everyone understood as a euphemism for the person the government believes was involved in the attacks. He did so to suggest to the public that real progress was being made in the anthrax case and that Dr. Hatfill had some involvement in it. Ladies and gentlemen, no previous Attorney General has ever used the phrase person of interest to describe an American citizen. Perhaps that is because responsible law enforcement officials have long known that to publicly implicate a private citizen in a horrendous crime instead of bringing charges in a court of law would violate their legal duties and ethics. Having ruined Dr. Hatfill's reputation, DOJ went even further. They had him fired from his teaching job at Louisiana State University without producing any evidence against him, without officially naming him a suspect, and without giving him an opportunity to hear and to respond to the charges against him. DOJ officials instructed LSU to terminate Dr. Hatfill from his employment. This action also was unprecedented. Having rendered him unemployed, government officials then rendered him unemployable by continuing an aggressive campaign to link Dr. Hatfill's name and face to the anthrax attacks. These officials did so despite the fact that they knew there was no evidence that would stand up in a court of law. And despite the fact that DOJ and FBI laws expressly prohibit such public condemnations. This civil complaint filed today should not have been necessary. For months, Dr. Hatfill has formally and informally lodged protests with the Department of Justice seeking to stop the campaign that has ruined his reputation, cost him his livelihood, and shattered his personal and professional life. Those protests, unfortunately, have fallen on deaf ears. Dr. Hatfill has also asked the Department of Justice and Mr. Ashcroft himself to step in and remedy his firing from Louisiana State University. It has become clear, however, that the Department of Justice will not remedy this problem because the Department of Justice is the problem. If the violations of Dr. Hatfill's rights were merely the result of overzealous detective work, we might not be here today. But as the constitutional violations pile up and the abuse continues, and as it becomes clear that there will be no corrective measures taken by the Attorney General or anyone else in the Department of Justice, the only reasonable conclusion is that the misconduct is intentional. And given that it is intentional, then it's difficult to imagine under any circumstances under which the investigators would turn their focus away from destroying Dr. Hatfill's life and back to the task of investigating other leads. Unless and until a court steps in and vindicates Dr. Hatfill's constitutional rights, protecting him from further government misconduct, Stephen Hatfill will never be free. Dr. Hatfill deserves to get his life back, and the American public deserves a real investigation. This lawsuit is not just about Stephen Hatfill. It is about the enormous power government officials have over the ordinary lives of American citizens and the potential for the abuse of that power. Stephen Hatfill is innocent of any involvement in the anthrax attacks. He is innocent both in fact and in the eyes of the law. Every citizen should therefore read this complaint with a clear understanding that whatever the government can legally do to Stephen Hatfill, it can legally do to any of us. His rights are no different from our rights. His liberty is no different from our liberty. If in this case, the Attorney General and his subordinates are permitted to sacrifice constitutional principles to political expedience, then it is not only Dr. Hatfill who would be less free, all of us would be less free. Dr. Hatfill looks forward to the opportunity to bring these abuses to light in the open forum of a public courtroom before an impartial judge, subject to the rule of law. Thank you.
Tom, what is the proof that you said this was an orchestrated campaign and that it wasn't just one or two people saying something about it? What's the proof it was orchestrated?
For a year now, there has been a campaign of leaks directed against Dr. Hatfill that have come from the highest levels of the Department of Justice and the FBI. And you can tell by the nature of the leaks. This is not one or two cowboys within those departments providing sourcing information to the hundreds of folks who write about, reporters who write about this case all the time. We are confident in the court of law we will demonstrate that there have been dozens of breaches of the law, a law that we've asked the Attorney General and his Office of Professional Responsibility to actually investigate this campaign, and we've been met with nothing but the back of the hand.
Why do you think the FBI is focused so exclusively on this file?
Well, I think what happened, unfortunately, is a year after the attacks, there was a lot of public pressure to suggest that there's not much progress being made in this investigation. And at that point, the Department of Justice could have essentially told the truth. The truth being that, look, a year out, we still haven't made any substantial progress in this anthrax investigation. And the truth could have been told that, look, American public, you're going to have to be patient with us. This is a very difficult case, and it's going to take us some time. But having Dr. Hatfill gave them an opportunity, because it gave them an opportunity to have a public face connected to this and linked to this. And now every newspaper report, every news report since the last year, every single story done on the anthrax case has talked about, had the obligatory paragraph of Dr. Stephen Hatfill being the person of interest. If Dr. Hatfill hadn't been outed by the Attorney General, if he was just one of the 20 or 30 other people of interest that they have said that exist out there, then all the news reports since then would have been, what is going on in the anthrax case and why isn't there any progress? Having Dr. Hatfill as a person of interest has allowed the press to focus, deflect the attention away from the lack of progress in the investigation and onto a human face.
Why him? Why did they pick him to out?
Well, I think they picked him out because the timing was right. And he has an interesting enough background that people would suggest that he's somebody that should have been looked at. And we have never for once said that he shouldn't have been somebody that they should have investigated during the course of this thing. He has an interesting history and he has expertise in bioweapons. But that's a far cry from looking at him as one of 20 or 50 or 100 other people that they have some interest in, than to outing him as the one and only person of interest in this case. I'm sorry, I can't hear your question.
What specific remedy are you seeking, especially just as monetary?
First and foremost, we're seeking a declaration by a federal district court judge that what has happened in the case is wrong. That's a violation of the Constitution, and it's a violation of the Department of Justice and the FBI's own rules. We're asking for a declaration and then an injunction to enjoin them from further violations of those rules. And lastly, we're asking for compensation for the year of hell that Stephen Hatfill has suffered and had to endure as part of this campaign.
How much? Two questions. How much are you seeking, and who's paying your bills?
As far as paying our bills, the last 10 months we've been representing Dr. Hatfill pro bono, which is called for free, which means for free. He is not paying our bills because he is, as I said, unemployable. We are doing this because we believe that it's an important point to make, to stand up for the rights of somebody whose constitutional rights have been blatantly violated.
How much is he seeking?
We have not asked in the complaint for a specific monetary amount. We're going to let the fine citizens of this community make that determination.
Why did you wait until now?
Judge Reggie Walton has got the case. He's a very experienced, very fair-minded jurist.
When do you expect the first hearing
Uh,
or appearance?
At some point, we will serve the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the other defendants, and then they will answer our complaint. At that point, after the answers are in, we will have our first public hearing on this.
Why did you wait until now to go to court to seek a remedy?
For a year now, I have asked the Department of Justice to act professionally and responsible in this case, and I assumed at some point that they would follow their own rules. It is a shame, folks, that it takes a lawsuit to insist that the Department of Justice follows the law, their own laws, which require them not to identify uncharged persons and implicate them in a crime. We have asked them routinely and repeatedly not to do that and to conduct investigations of those who haven't. We have met with nothing but silence. And given that, it is a shame, but it is a shame that a private citizen has to file a lawsuit to get the Department of Justice and the FBI to follow its own laws.
Why isn't Dr. Hatfield here?
Dr. Hatfield is not here today because Dr. Hatfield has never sought nor wanted public attention, ever. What he wants, folks, is his life back. He is a private citizen who wants the anonymity that all of us are blessed with. You know, one of the rights that we most cherish as American citizens is the right to be left alone. That's what Dr. Hatfield wants. And more fundamentally, a year ago, Dr. Hatfield came before the cameras and very forcefully expressed his innocence in the anthrax case and asked folks to leave him alone. It's now a year later. He remains innocent. He had no involvement in the anthrax attacks. And how many times and in how many different ways is Dr. Hatfield supposed to publicly proclaim his innocence? He has done it. He remains innocent, and he has, frankly, no desire to have his face to become a commodity to sell newspapers.
What do you think of the Department of Justice's claim in December that they really wanted to shield him from scrutiny?
Yeah. You couldn't have scripted a better answer to this. In response to a letter from Senator Grassley, their Department of Justice official said the reason that Attorney General Ashcroft used the phrase "person of interest" was to deflect media scrutiny away from Dr. Hatfield. Well, I'll leave that to the American public to determine whether they believe that was the true motive. But I can tell you this: if you accept them at their word, it is probably the most incompetent act of a government official in the history of our nation. You go back a year from the time that John Ashcroft identified Stephen Hatfield as a person of interest, and I challenge anyone to find an article or a news report on the anthrax case that does not have the obligatory paragraph describing Dr. Hatfield as a person of interest.
Your complaint mentions Dr. Barbara Rosenberg and also a number of media outlets and false media reports. Why did you choose not to name her or any media outlet in your lawsuit?
You know, one of my criticisms of the FBI in the complaint is announcing well in advance something that they're going to do. For example, 2 months before they desired to go into the ponds in Maryland to search him, they announced that publicly to everybody. That's something that no credible law enforcement organization does. They don't announce 2 months in advance that they're going to a particular place, to a particular crime scene to search. It's an open invitation for any person hooked on the anthrax case to go contaminate a crime scene. So having criticized them for announcing what they're going to do in advance, I am not going to be a hypocrite and do the same. I don't know to this day who else is going to be in Stephen Hatfield's crosshairs, but it is fundamentally clear that there are a number of people in the press who have fallen down, who have acted irresponsibly, and have failed to do their job. I am before you today so you can put a public face, a face and a name to the allegations that I've made in my complaint. I challenge you in the press to insist that the Department of Justice and the FBI do the same thing. We are willing to stand before a court in an open forum in a courtroom and prove the allegations we've made in this complaint. Now, the Department of Justice and FBI are doing it in the shadows. They don't have the courage or the convictions to say publicly that Stephen Hatfield is a suspect. They won't do that. Now, those of you members of the press, I'd ask you to put the following questions to Attorney General Ashcroft. Is it appropriate for the sitting Attorney General to identify somebody as a person of interest in the case? And if they believe that that is the case, that it is appropriate, then they should be able to answer the following questions. Who else are persons of interest in this case? How long have they remained persons of interest? And precisely what do you do to get off that list? You should also put, to be fair, the question to him, as part of the tools in the arsenal the Department of Justice has to fight the war on terrorism. Does Attorney General Ashcroft and his subordinates believe that it's appropriate for them to fire a presumptively innocent person from their job? And if they do believe so, do they intend to use that technique in future cases? I would ask members of the press who asked me some very tough and skeptical questions to put these same questions before spokespersons of the Department of Justice and the FBI and insist that they do it on the record, not in comfortable anonymity through leaks and back channels. Folks, it's very hot out here. I appreciate your attention. I've probably exhausted your patience, and I thank you very much. We'll see you.
Spell your name again, please.
C-O-N-N-O-L-L-Y.
First name?
Connolly. Thomas. Thomas.
It's on the complaint. Everything's on the
If you want a copy of the complaint or the transcript, you can get them right over here.